Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. The House has, in fact, passed a short-term government funding bill to avert a government shutdown. After two versions of a continuing resolution fell apart earlier this week, House Republicans agreed to introduce a bill that would fund the government through March, extend the Farm Bill, and provide $110 billion in disaster aid. Those provisions were all part of the original deal negotiated alongside Democrats. House Speaker Mike Johnson spoke shortly after the vote to celebrate the bill's ultimate passage.
We are excited about this outcome tonight. We're grateful that everyone stood together to do the right thing. And having gotten this done now as the last order of business for the year, we are set up for a big and important new start in January. We can't wait to get to that point. We encourage swift passage in the Senate now. They need to do their job as the House just did. We will all go home.
I want to go now to CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Nikole, I think your crystal ball was just about on point there in terms of the vote timing. Run us through how this last-minute deal was agreed to and ultimately passed.
Well, it's simple. The holidays are coming, Christmas, Hanukkah. Lawmakers are ready to get home. And so somehow when they're up against the clock, up against the wall, they find a way to work things out. And I think this evening was no different. But look, you know, there were some serious obstacles and headwinds here. And I think from the outset, no one really wanted a shutdown. But obviously, Speaker Johnson was kind of in a very difficult position in terms of having negotiated this package with Democrats initially needing their support and needing their votes. That bill didn't even get a vote. And then you had the next day the speaker kind of pushing more of this Trump-backed bill that include language to increase or suspend the debt ceiling. That failed. And so really, you know, he had to kind of make a calculation of how does he stitch things back together again? If you can't get support from Democrats, you can't get support from your own party. If you do something that the incoming president supports, you know, what do you do? And so I think what we saw happen this evening is that he kind of cobbled together a combination of those two factors in the sense, as you mentioned, kind of keeping the core elements of these two proposals that were scuttled, you know, extending the government funding through March, keeping that disaster aid in, which was critical to a number of lawmakers, particularly those in the Southeast, since a lot of that money goes to help those victims of Hurricane Helene, Milton, but also other natural disasters around the country, and then also keeping that farm aid. That was also essential because Congress did not extend the Farm Bill, and so this, you know, in essence, provides a one-year extension of the Farm Bill, but also includes that funding for farmers. We talked to a farmer today, many of whom say that this was critical. So those were kind of elements of both packages that simply couldn't drop off. What did come off, though, was that debt limit language and all of those extra provisions that were negotiated by Democrats, some of which really angered Republicans.
And that debt limit provision was so interesting, Nikole, because that was kind of the headline for why that first bipartisan deal was scuttled, because the president-elect was opposed to the debt limit provision. Ultimately, it passed without that in there. Do we expect that that issue is going to crop up again soon?
Well, it has to, simply because you'll remember at the beginning of this Congress, of course, when Kevin McCarthy was Speaker, he negotiated an agreement with the Biden White House to extend the debt limit. And so that's going to expire in the middle of next year, I believe sometime around June of 2025. And keep in mind, the debt limit basically is like the nation's credit card. It just gives the U.S. more borrowing authority to pay its bills. And so the issue and why the president-elect was kind of pushing this is, as we all know, and as we've been reporting, he has a very ambitious agenda. You know, he wants to enact these mass deportations, really beef up border security. He wants to extend his tax cuts. Well, that's going to require some extra dollars from Congress. And so by extending the debt limit, you know, that just kind of would have given a little bit more leeway, particularly if there's more spending around some of these issues. So you're not bumping up against that cap come June. So those discussions around the debt limit and the debt ceiling will need to be had, because it isn't something that you can simply insert into a package overnight. You know, those negotiations between Kevin McCarthy and President Biden took months. So it is something that lawmakers and the incoming president-elect will have to try to get ahead of as we approach that June deadline next year.
Yeah, and on that, the funding of this continuing resolution is just authorized through mid-March. Donald Trump is going to be president then. He's going to have both the House and the Senate under Republican control. So what happens then? Does it seem like there's a better opportunity for him to get that debt limit raised at that point? Or because we saw so many defections from the Republican Party, does it seem like that's still a tough road to hoe for the president-elect?
I mean, I think it's too early to say, and obviously government funding doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a debt limit increase, although sometimes that has happened in the past, or, you know, there have been attempts to do so. I mean, they are kind of two separate issues, even though they are to a certain extent interrelated. At the end of the day, you know, most lawmakers and congressional leaders want to keep the government funded. The broader issue is how they do it. You know, there has been a push for so many years on Capitol Hill to do everything through regular order, do it through the normal appropriations process, so they don't have to keep doing these temporary continuing resolutions or band-aids. They want to be able to fund the government for the entire fiscal year. Imagine that. So, you know, I think the thought is that when the president-elect, when he officially assumes office in January, you know, he will be able to kind of put his own stamp on that more long-term prospect in terms of appropriations. And that way, Republicans, when they do have that trifecta, can really try to implement those priorities that they have through that regular order process. So that's ultimately the goal. And again, whether or not the debt limit is dealt with at that point in time or they deal with it separately remains to be seen.
But for now, any of those people who were worried about the Congress being unable to come up with a compromise, they can at least have a little bit of peace during the holidays. And happy holidays to you, Nikole Killion. Thanks.
And to you as well.